Hey people, I never imagined I'd be here, sharing my story with strangers, but life has a funny way of pulling the rug out from under you when you least expect it. So, here it goes. I met Kate 10 years ago, and back then she was everything I ever wanted. It was summertime, and we were at a mutual friend's birthday. One of those laid back, casual gatherings where everyone's drinking beer and chatting around a grill. She caught my attention immediately. It wasn't just that she was beautiful, though she was, with her bright green eyes and that confident, effortless smile. It was the way she carried herself, like she owned the room without even trying. I remember watching her laugh at some joke and thinking, man, I've got to talk to her. Somehow, I worked up the courage to introduce myself, and we ended up talking for the rest of the night. We covered everything: music, travel, favorite movies, and even joined in singing some cheesy campfire song when someone pulled out a guitar. By the end of the evening, I was completely hooked. I knew I'd met someone special. Things moved fast after that. We started dating, and within a few months, it was obvious this wasn't just a casual fling. We were in love. The kind of love that consumes you, where you can't stop thinking about each other. 2 years later, we got married in a small ceremony surrounded by our closest friends and family. People used to say we were the perfect couple, and for a long time, I believed them. We had big plans for our future. We wanted to travel the world, buy a house, and maybe start a family someday. Back then, I thought marrying Kate was the best decision I'd ever made. She wasn't just my wife, she was my partner, my best friend, my everything. At least, that's what I thought at the time. Fast forward 10 years, and from the outside, Kate and I seem to have a pretty good life. We live in a cozy house on the outskirts of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's nothing extravagant, but it's ours. The kind of place where you can sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and watch the world go by. Kate works as a designer for a small marketing agency, and I run my own landscaping business. It's not glamorous work, but it's steady, and I'm proud of what I've built from the ground up. We don't have kids, though not for lack of trying. For a while, we talked about starting a family, but as the years passed, those conversations happened less and less, until we stopped bringing it up altogether. Our days follow a predictable rhythm. We both work long hours, and by the time we're home, we're usually too tired to do much besides eat dinner, watch some TV, and call it a night. Weekends are a mix of hanging out with friends, the occasional date night, and trying to keep the spark alive. At least, I thought that's what we were doing. Lately, though, something feels off. Kate's been distant. Not in an obvious, dramatic way, but in those small, subtle ways that are hard to ignore once you start noticing them. She's always on her phone, scrolling or texting, her face lighting up in a way that doesn't happen when she's talking to me. When I ask what's so funny, she just shrugs and says, "Oh, it's nothing, just work stuff." Here's what's strangest. Both time and time again, her phone is lighting up. She's also quieter than she used to be. Kate was always the talker in our relationship, the one who could turn a simple question into an hour-long conversation. But now, she seems lost in her own thoughts half the time. I'll ask her how her day was, and she'll give me a vague, one-word answer before retreating into her own little world. I've been trying to brush it off, telling myself it's just stress. Her job's demanding, and she's always been a bit of a perfectionist. But there's this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, this sense that something's changed. Something's wrong. For the first time in our marriage, I feel like we're not on the same page. Like we're drifting apart, and I have no idea how to stop it. I keep trying to push those thoughts away. Oh, hoping things will somehow go back to normal on their own. Leave some kids for another Christmas. But deep down, I know that's just wishful thinking. Something's coming. I can feel it. I just don't know what. It was a quiet Wednesday evening, the kind where nothing seemed out of place, until Kate broke the silence. We were sitting at the kitchen table eating takeout when she suddenly said, "We need to talk." Her voice was tense and my stomach immediately sank. "What's going on?" I asked cautiously, setting my fork down. She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room before meeting mine. "I have to confess something," she said softly. "I had an affair." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't think. "What?" I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "It was a long time ago," she added quickly. "It didn't mean anything. It's over now. But I felt like you deserved to know." I stood up, pacing the kitchen as my mind raced. "Why are you telling me this now?" I demanded. If it's over, why bring it up? Kate looked down at her hands. Because I don't want to have secrets anymore. I want us to move forward. Who was it? I asked, my voice shaking. Did you sleep with him? She hesitated before nodding. Yes, but it didn't last. It was a mistake. A mistake. That's all it was to her. I turned away, my chest tight with anger and betrayal. I need some time, I muttered, leaving her sitting there as I walked out of the room. That night I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering if anything in our marriage had ever been real. The next morning I woke up with a pounding headache, the result of exhaustion and emotional overload. When I walked into the kitchen, Kate was already there, sitting at the table with a mug of coffee. Her eyes were swollen and red, a clear sign she hadn't slept much either. I sat down across from her, the weight of the previous night still hanging heavy between us. I need to know everything, I said, my voice flat and emotionless. It was your half-truths. Who was it? She hesitated, staring down into her coffee as if it held the answers. For a long moment she didn't say anything, and I could feel the tension building like a ticking bomb. Finally, she looked up at me, her face pale and trembling. It was your father, she said quietly. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. What did you just say? My voice was barely above a whisper. It was your dad, she repeated, her voice shaking. It was a long time ago. It didn't mean anything, and I ended it as soon as I realized how wrong it was. Her words hit me like a wrecking ball. My father. Not a stranger, not a coworker. My father. My chest tightened, and my hands clenched into fists. I couldn't process it. I couldn't even breathe. You slept with my father? I said, my voice rising with each word. Are you out of your mind? Kate burst into tears, her hands covering her face. It was a mistake, Mark. I was feeling lonely, and he was there. I didn't mean for it to happen. I shot up from my chair, the screech of the legs against the floor cutting through her sobs. You didn't mean for it to happen? You didn't mean to betray me with my own father? That's the best you've got? Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't feel any sympathy for her. All I felt was rage and disgust, like a fire burning through me. Without another word, I turned and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind me. My world had been turned upside down in the span of a single conversation. I didn't know how to process it. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to make sense of it again. I didn't speak to Kate for hours after her confession. I stayed in my home office, pacing back and forth, trying to make sense of it all. The anger, the betrayal, it felt too overwhelming to confront her. But eventually, I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. I had to face her to hear the whole truth. When I finally walked back into the kitchen, Kate was still there. Her face was pale, tear-streaked, and she clutched her coffee mug like it was the only thing holding her together. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with fear and regret. Start talking, I said, my voice cold and sharp. I need to know how the hell this happened. She took a shaky breath, setting the mug down as her hands trembled. It was a few years ago, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. You were working late all the time. I felt like we were drifting apart, but I didn't know how to talk to you about it, so I just buried it. I crossed my arms, glaring at her. And that's supposed to explain why you turned to him? Her tears started again as she nodded. He was around a lot back then, helping with the yard, fixing things around the house. We started talking more, and at first it was innocent, just small conversations, but then it got personal. He said he understood how I was feeling, and I guess I let my guard down. You guess? I snapped, my voice rising. You let your guard down with my father, and you thought that was okay? She flinched at my words, her voice breaking as she continued. It wasn't okay. I know that. It was wrong. So wrong. And I ended it as soon as I realized how much I was hurting you. Hurting us. I felt guilty every single day since. I stared at her, my chest tightening with anger and pain. Did you ever think about me? About how this would destroy me? Did it even cross your mind how it would feel to know that my wife and my own father betrayed me? She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I wasn't thinking, Mark. I was selfish and stupid, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. If I could take it back, I would. But I can't. All I can do is tell you the truth and try to fix things. Her words hung in the air, but they felt hollow, like an apology that couldn't even begin to touch the depth of what she'd done. Fix things? How do you fix something this broken? I need time, I said, finally, my voice shaking. I don't know what to do with this, but right now I can't even look at you. I walked out, leaving her sobbing at the kitchen table. My mind was a storm of emotions. Anger, hurt, disbelief. This wasn't just about Kate anymore. It was about my father too. And in that moment, I didn't know who I hated more. I spent the rest of the day pacing the house, my emotions swinging wildly between rage and heartbreak. The image of Kate and my father, together, was burned into my mind. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it. It felt like my life had turned into some cruel, twisted soap opera. The kind you'd never believe if it wasn't happening to you. When I finally calmed down enough to think straight, I went back to the kitchen. Kate was still there, sitting at the table like she hadn't moved since I'd walked out. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen and red from crying. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for her, but the anger surged back before I could. Why him? I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. Of all the people in the world, why the hell did it have to be him? She looked up at me, her expression full of guilt and desperation. I don't know, she said softly. It wasn't planned, it just happened. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. It just happened? You don't just happen to sleep with your husband's father, Kate. That's not how this works. She flinched at my words, fresh tears streaming down her face. I know, Mark. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I was lonely. And he was there. He listened to me. And I let things go too far. I stared at her, the fury in my chest building with every word she said. Do you even realize what you've done? You didn't just betray me, Kate. You destroyed everything. Our marriage, our family, and now I have to live with this, knowing that the two people I trusted most in the world stabbed me in the back. She reached out toward me, but I took a step back, shaking my head. Don't, I said firmly. Just don't. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. I know you probably hate me right now, but I'm begging you. Please give me a chance to make this right. I laughed again, but it was harsh and empty. Make it right? How, Kate? How do you make right something like this? Are you going to undo the past, erase the fact that you slept with my father? There's no coming back from this. She didn't respond. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock on the wall. The silence was suffocating. Finally, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get out of that house. I needed space to think, to process, to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. I spent the next couple of days trying to make sense of everything. My mind was a chaotic mess, constantly replaying Kate's confession and the depth of the betrayal. But no matter how much I turned it over in my head, one question kept surfacing. Why now? Why did she decide to tell me after all this time? When I finally confronted her, she was sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. She turned it off as I walked in, her face a mixture of guilt and sadness. Why now, Kate? I asked, crossing my arms. Why confess this to me after years of lying? What made you decide to come clean? She sighed and ran a hand through her hair. Because I couldn't keep living with the guilt, she said. Every time I looked at you, I felt like I was lying to your face. I couldn't take it anymore. Her answer sounded sincere, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside me. Do you think that makes it better? I asked, my voice rising. You didn't tell me because you wanted to fix things. You told me because you couldn't handle the guilt. This isn't about us, Kate. This is about you. She flinched at my words, but didn't argue. I know, she said quietly, and I'm sorry. I know I should have told you sooner, but I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly, because now you've lost me anyway. She started crying again, but I couldn't stand to be in the same room. I grabbed my keys and walked out, deciding it was time to confront someone else. My father. As I drove to his house, a mixture of anger and dread churned inside me. I hadn't spoken to him since Kate's confession, and I had no idea what I was going to say. All I knew was that I needed answers. If Kate's betrayal hurt, his destroyed me. When I arrived, he opened the door with a calm, almost indifferent expression. "Mark," he said, stepping aside to let me in, "what's going on?" "You know damn well what's going on," I snapped, stepping into his living room. "Honey, I've been working on it for a while. Don't worry, we're good. No matter what, nobody tells me." After a long time, Kate told me everything. About you, about the affair. His face barely changed, but I caught the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. "Look," he said after a pause, "it was a mistake. It was a long time ago, and it never should have happened." Why?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. "Why the hell would you do that to me? To your own son?" He sighed, leaning against the back of his couch. "I don't have a good answer for you, Mark," he said. "I was going through a rough time, and things got out of hand." "Out of hand?" I said, fists clenched. "That's all you've got? You betrayed me, my marriage, and your family, and you're treating it like it was some minor lapse of judgment?" He shrugged, his calm demeanor only fueling my anger. "What do you want me to say? I made a mistake, I'm sorry. But it's in the past, and it doesn't change anything now. It changes everything," I said, my voice trembling. "You've ruined our relationship, and you didn't even have the decency to tell me the truth. I had to hear it from Kate." He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "Don't bother trying to explain," I said. "There's no excuse for what you did." I turned and walked out. As I drove away, my emotions churned. Anger, betrayal, sadness. But mostly, I felt empty. Like the life I thought I had was gone, and I was left picking up the shattered pieces. By the time I got home, I was trembling with rage. Talking to my father had only made things worse. His indifference, his refusal to take any real responsibility, it was like pouring gasoline on an already raging fire. I couldn't believe that the two people I trusted most in my life had done this to me, then acted like it was something I just had to accept and move on from. Kate was in the kitchen when I walked in. She turned to me, her eyes red and puffy. "Mark, where have you been? I was worried." "Don't," I snapped, slamming my keys onto the counter. "You don't get to play the concerned wife anymore." Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. I was too angry to care. "I talked to him," I said, my voice sharp. "I talked to my father." Kate froze, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "What did he say?" "Oh, you know," I said bitterly. Admitted it, of course, but according to him, it was just a mistake, something that got out of hand. No big deal, right? "Mark, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I know you're angry, but what, Kate?" I exploded, my voice echoing in the small kitchen. "You and my father had an affair. Do you even understand how disgusting that is? How humiliating? You've both destroyed everything, and neither of you seems to care." Tears streamed down her face, and she reached out toward me, but I stepped back. "Don't touch me," I said coldly. "You don't get to cry and act like the victim here. You did this, both of you." She sank into a chair, sobbing into her hands. "I don't know what else to say," she choked out. "I've told you everything. I've apologized. I just want to fix this." "Fix this?" I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "There's no fixing this, Kate. You didn't just cheat on me. You destroyed my family. How am I supposed to move on from this? How am I supposed to look at you, at him, and not see the betrayal? And why are you always sitting in this ducking kitchen?" My voice rose with every word, shaking with the force of my anger. Without thinking, I grabbed a plate from the counter and hurled it against the wall. It shattered an impact, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. Kate flinched, her sobs growing louder. But I wasn't done. I grabbed another plate, then a glass, watching as they smashed into pieces on the floor. Each shattering object felt like a release, a small way to channel the rage that I couldn't keep inside. "Stop," Kate screamed, standing up and trying to grab my arm. "Mark, please stop." I pulled away from her, my chest heaving as I stood in the wreckage of our kitchen. Broken dishes, shards of glass. It was everywhere. But I didn't care. "You don't get to tell me what to do," I said, my voice low and cold. "Not after what you've done." She sank back into the chair, crying so hard she could barely breathe. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her. The reality of it all hit me again, like a fresh wound. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. That night, I slept in the guest room. The destruction in the kitchen felt like a physical representation of what was left of our marriage. Shattered, irreparable. I couldn't see a way forward, not for us, and maybe not even for me. All I felt was anger, despair, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. I stayed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. My mind replayed the chaos of the night before, the shouting, the smashing plates, Kate's sobs. It all felt surreal, like a bad dream. But it wasn't. It was real. And I was stuck in the middle of it. Eventually, I got up. The smell of coffee drifted down the hall, pulling me into the kitchen. Kate was there, silently cleaning up the mess from the night before. She looked up when I walked in, her face pale and exhausted, but she didn't say anything. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. "I need space," I said finally, breaking the silence. My voice sounded distant even to me. "I can't think straight with you here." She nodded, her shoulders slumping like she'd been expecting it. "I'll go stay with my sister for a while." "Good," I said flatly. The words didn't bring me any relief, just a deep, hollow ache. That afternoon, Kate packed a bag and left. I stood at the window, watching as her car backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. The sound of the tires on the pavement felt like the final door slamming shut on our life together. For the first time since her confession, I felt something other than anger. It was grief, a raw, gut-wrenching pain that came from realizing I'd lost something I thought was unbreakable. In the days that followed, I buried myself in work. I spent long hours at my landscaping company, taking on more than I usually did just to keep myself busy. When I wasn't working, I was at home, staring at the walls or drinking more than I probably should have. Anything to avoid sitting alone with my thoughts. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the questions kept coming back. Could I forgive Kate? Did I even want to? And what about my father? How was I supposed to move forward knowing what he'd done, knowing who he really was? I told myself I needed more time. Time to think, time to process. But deep down I knew the truth. Some things can't be forgiven. Some wounds cut too deep to ever fully heal. The days after Kate left were some of the hardest I'd ever lived through. The house felt suffocatingly quiet, empty in a way I'd never experienced before. I avoided my father entirely, ignoring his texts and calls. I wasn't ready to face him, or the part of myself that still hoped for an apology I knew would never come. As the days turned into weeks, the sharp edge of my anger began to dull. But what replaced it was even harder to face. Clarity. I realized that no apology, no explanation, could undo what had happened. Kate and my father hadn't just betrayed me. They'd shattered the foundation of trust our relationships were built on. And without trust, there was nothing left to save. One afternoon, after hours spent sitting in the silence of the house, I made my decision. I called Kate and asked her to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. I didn't want to have this conversation in our home, where too many memories still lingered. When she arrived, she looked nervous, her usual confidence replaced by something smaller, more fragile. I couldn't tell if it was guilt, regret, or something else, but it didn't matter. This conversation wasn't about her anymore. "Mark," she began as she sat down, her voice tentative. "Thank you for meeting me. I'm filing for divorce," I said, cutting her off. My voice was steady, almost detached. "This is over, Kate. There's no coming back from what you did." Her face crumpled, tears filling her eyes. "Mark, please, don't do this. We can fix this. I know we can." I shook my head. "We can't. You didn't just break my trust. You destroyed it. You destroyed us. And I'll never be able to look at you without remembering what you did. I deserve better than that." She sobbed, reaching across the table for my hand, but I pulled away. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but You're right," I said, standing up. "You don't, and I'm done trying to figure out why you did it. It doesn't matter anymore." The conversation ended there. I walked out of the coffee shop without looking back, leaving her to sit with her tears and her choices. For the first time since her confession, I felt like I could breathe. The divorce was finalized quickly. We sold the house, divided the property, and went our separate ways. Kate moved to another city, and I stayed in Pennsylvania, focusing on rebuilding my life. I started going to therapy again, spent more time with friends, and threw myself into my work. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. As for my father, I confronted him one last time. I didn't go in expecting an apology. I knew better by then. But I needed to say my piece. I told him exactly how I felt, how his actions had shattered my trust and destroyed any chance of a relationship between us. He tried to defend himself, but I didn't care to listen. By the time I walked out of his house, I knew I'd never speak to him again. It's been a year since everything fell apart. The scars are still there, but they don't hurt as much anymore. I've learned to find joy in the small things. Morning runs, dinners with friends, quiet evenings with a good book. I don't know if I'll ever trust someone the way I trusted Kate, but I'm okay with that. For now, I'm focusing on myself, on building a life that feels solid and honest. Sometimes letting go isn't about giving up. It's about moving forward, choosing peace over pain. That's what I've done. It's not the life I planned, but it's mine. And I'm finally at peace with that. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell me what you think about that story. Have a good day, and bye.